Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for attending our second office hour. The topic today is time tracking methodology, how this impacts ServiceNow's product portfolio and project management area. We have our subject matter experts, Ben Ennis and Scott Wallace, who will be discussing, well, call going through the topics, setting you up with about the first 20 minutes. Here's kind of a level setting around best practices, etc., to kind of help us. The remaining 40 minutes, we'll start going through different questions and answers as they come from the field. So what we do ask is the part that if you mute your phones, that we have a chance to have Ben and Scott kind of walk us through the first 20 minutes. But then as the latter half, if we take it one question at a time to allow others to kind of go through. We do have up to about 5 different customers on this call. So we have University of South Carolina, Vidant Health, Wake Health, New Hanover, and Moses Cone Health that are representing. You guys were the select few that were participating as part of this pilot. After this call, what will happen is we will get a slide deck from Scott and Ben. So what they cover, they will provide to you guys, as well as we will provide a recording to those who need it. I was able to get that approved as well. And then lastly, I will send a new feedback survey out to you guys as well, so that you guys can provide feedback on this session. The goal, again, is to allow us the ability to continue to grow and groom these for future possible scenarios. So, any questions or comments about anything that I've stated everyone understand and agree? And I know you guys all know me. I'm pretty much your customer success advocate. So it's great to have you all on the phone, especially this Friday. So with that said, I'm going to hand the floor over to Ben and Scott. You guys go ahead and take away, and I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today on a Friday, as I mentioned. So today's topic, right, time tracking methodology and how it impacts PPM. So I have just a few slides I want to go through first. We'll get through those kind of fast, and we'll get in the system, look at a few things, and we'll, based on the feedback from the last cycle, we'll take a little less time doing the demos and stuff, and really open up more for discussion, so you can have a dialogue on you know, the way you do it today, best practices, challenges, you know, all that kind of stuff, right? So, and Ben, do you have any openings or comments you want to make there?
I do not.
We'll also have someone else, I think, either might join us today halfway through this this session, and will be on future calls also. So we're kind of expanding the team in support of the office hours process here. Is Namita. She's actually, the hours are a little different here. She's actually over in India, and so I don't know if she's going to join for the first half hour or not, but we'll see. But anyway, she's also part of our product organization, part of our product team. So today, time tracking impact to PPM, all right? So the first thing I wanted to go through real quickly was the concept. This is something that kind of came from the first session, but it's also the session here is, okay, what's the purpose of time cards? What do they do, right? It's a collection mechanism, of course. To me, the concept is it's the back-end cycle. So you do all this planning, and of course, to figure out where you're tracking, how you're tracking, kind of tactically, you need time cards. Another benefit of the time cards is what I call continuous improvement. So if you plan something and you track the time against it, and over time, you can begin to look back and measure how good your quality of your planning is, whether it's operational work or even project work, right? Strategic work. Doesn't matter what type of work it is, you start to get some data points over time. I know some customers who look at this for continuous improvement. They use a lot of the operational data to forecast forward for the following year to say, okay, we planned this amount of work in these different categories. How do we actually end up? Same thing on the planned work. If you have a certain type of project that is consistent, you know, a certain repetitive type of activity, how do we plan it out by phase? Okay, we planned this number of hours. How accurate was it? Because you think about the planning concept is upfront, you know, maybe 50% is good enough for your accuracy, right? As you move into the project, it needs to be more refined. Of course, getting to 10% is kind of the goal, plus or minus. But the back cycle, I guess what I'm getting at is without the data in the backside, it's kind of hard to do that type of an evaluation. So as you look at the time cards, they can collect different types of time, right? PTO, admin type time. We talked about these in resource management. Operational type work. So KTL, incident problem change, depending if you're doing Scrum work and where that work is managed, it could be operational or it could be in planned work. On the planned work side, of course, you can do work against projects, against tasks, demand tasks, and Scrum work. Ultimately, this all work points to these time cards point to a timesheet. And that timesheet's a collection of, effectively of effort. And there's an entire process flow we'll walk through in a second here around time cards. And depending what release you're on, there were some significant enhancements in New York to really make the entire workflow of cards, I would guess say, it works much better. So you have like recall and delegation and things like that. So workflow is much better. But ultimately, you're looking for that actual effort. And the other dimension to that is if you're using it for any type of cost, you can add an expense line. And you add an expense line and you might have rate against that, of course, which now updates actual cost. So you think about no matter what object you're looking at, say a project, you're collecting time against work against that. So there's the effort based, and then eventually, if you want to, you can do the cost based. This is kind of like just kind of an overview summary of what the purpose is and how this is all collected. So the actual mechanism on time tracking, there's some properties that you need to know about. There's policies, timesheet policies, and as I hit each one of these, I think I'm just going to jump right to the system, I think, and look at it. Makes it easier instead of jumping around if I can type. So timesheet policies. So you can set up different policies to operate for different ways. You can have a default policy. Again, you see these are active, one's not active. But as an example, a default policy that's kind of just happens everywhere. Okay, what days a week start on? Do I allow blank time cards, auto create, auto recall on the recall function, right? Actual hours, update the resource plans, right? Kind of like this is kind of the default. If you do a recall period, what's your time range, right? But you notice over here, there isn't anything that dictates like where the routing process is, if you allow different rates. So this is kind of like the basic simple. This would be default to everybody because there's no users. So it's like clicked as default. If you wanted to, you could have a policy, example, like maybe there's a specific policy for PMO people. And you can see I added Troy to this policy. So without anyone added, the default would be picked up. If I start adding people, there's a unique policy. Here's an example. I allowed work entries automatic, right? These were the same time recall period. Day starts on period, the same. What I did differently here is, depending on how you look at non-project time versus project time, who approves it? And it's routed. So maybe non-project time, I have a manager in my group, independent of the PMO, and that person owns my time and approves my time. So when I put in time off or I put in any type of operational type work, right? Training, something like that, it'll be routed to that manager for approval. Any project-based work will be routed to their project manager. And as you can see, you can change these. Here's the settings, like auto do it. You can set it to user or both or auto. So this is an example of, it allows you to be a little bit more finite in terms of how the routing process happens. And then of course, there may be a default, rate type that you want to have, right? You can set up different types of rates. Say for instance, you have holiday work or overtime work or, the system default standard type work, right? So I set it at the default. And this is default policy too. So depending on how you want to do the actual activity of the work, there's an important distinction on what to set up. The rate types, okay, so when you look at properties in a project, when you put in time, there's different categories of work that you can put time against. So when you record time, you can say, hey, this is part of an admin, this is part of build, deploy, you can add, this is just really for the timesheet. There isn't much behind other than just it's a category, right? So you can categorize different types of time in the timesheet. Of course, rate types, we'll get into that in a second here in a couple pieces about how this is calculated, right? There's a function in delegation new in New York, which is terrific. So you can delegate to a person. There are rules for delegation, right? The process of submit and recall, you can do a recall. You can recall, someone can reject time, right? When you do the recall, an important function is it actually reverses it, reverses the time and it reverses the expense entry. So you don't have kind of what we used to call orphaned records where a timesheet got deleted or changed and there's not a process to make sure it's consistent. So when you do a recall, there's sets of activities that properly reverse the entry and reverse the expense, right? Of course, on the backside, when you do the time entry, the time entry will could generate if you choose the expense line, right? If you use an expense line processing, you have to obviously, of course, process that record to create the financial record. So it can create, in other words, it sits in it doesn't sit in a process, it's pending state, and you want to prove it to a process state if you want that expense line entry for the cost to be populated in the project. So here's just a quick image, right? Of course, the timesheet, it's a way to collect the different types of ways to collect tasks. I think I'll just go jump in timesheet here. It's probably an easier way to do it. I'm gonna impersonate Troy. So Troy McCoy, let's say he's putting a timesheet in, standard user. I have different types of tasks. Troy's been assigned to a lot of different types of tasks. So demand tasks, if you're not familiar with that, that's a separate session. We can talk about that, but that's in a demand object now. You can actually have effort put against a demand task. Enhancements, be assigned to a couple of enhancements. He's got 2 incidents, maybe those as a result of coming on the triage board in an Agile. He's been assigned to a project, right? 2 of those. He has project tasks, which is probably more common. And he has a couple stories. So there's there's 1 story. So an activity against Scrum, right? He also possibly can see tasks as a result of being in part of a group. So it's not like you have to assign, everything has to be assigned. Maybe it's, hey, there's a group, there's a bunch of tasks, someone picks up the tasks and works on it, right? So group tasks show up. So you look at, all the different types. So problems and stories right now are assigned to this particular group that he's in. I think it's ServiceNow dev, I think is what it is. So there's 11 stories and there's 1 problem that's been generated. Of course, then there's the other, right? Which is all these standard out of the box type of definitions for other work types, right? Admin, KTLO, et cetera. We added enhancement as I think, kind of forgot, Bennett, this demo, or I think it was a different demo we were doing enhancement on, but no, it was last 2 weeks ago. We did enhancement for you. So another way to track this time, right? And all this gets submitted, gets put on, you can automatically generate a time card. If I hit that, it's going to go out and find what's available for him to put time on. You can bring timelines in separate, right? As you start putting time, all this stuff starts to add up at the top, right? And then there's a submit process, right? There's standard process. There's also notifications up here. If there's something that's been rejected, as you can see here, there's a couple rejected. You could go look at the rejected and you can act on the rejected and resubmit it, right? So you get these notifications right here, this little bell notification, right? And you can also, with this function here, it takes you to the actual entry. So you actually are, instead of looking at here and opening it up, you can actually pop out and go to the actual entry. Here, of course, is where you can open, you can delete it, you can submit it. So, of course, there's a lot of functionality here that allows you can move between periods, right? Go to periods. So there's a lot of way to move back and forth. I know some people that like to kind of set up their timesheets for a period forward looking and then just kind of manage it that way. Some people do it at the end of the week. Some people never do it. You have to ask them to do it, which sometimes we hear a lot about, right? The person here. So go back here. So jump quick next to the states, right? So there's a pending state. Eventually, when you add up a bunch of activity that gets submitted, so pending is kind of when you're just putting time in during the week, whatever that process is, right? Submitted basically is, okay, I'm submitting it for someone to approve it. Remember how we talked about the routing? It could go to just a project manager plus your manager. It really depends how you set the routing up. It's possible that something gets rejected, right? And you'll get the notification on rejected, so you have to go act on it. The user has to go act on it. Again, it's depending if it's done a full recall, then because remember, in this state, if it's rejected, you haven't created all the follow-on activities yet, right? Expense lines and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of waiting. It can be approved or rejected. If it's been approved, then it goes to process state, and that's when the other sets of activities happen. You get the expense line and then the process here. The recall is basically the later function. It says, wait a minute, we need to reverse something, change something. And then, of course, is the properties I mentioned there. You have these properties to determine how long you want to be able to recall. Recall is generally used for prior period if you need to recall something to make a change to it. You set that. It's a policy setting, right? I want to go through this one here, but here's kind of a detailed workflow of when you submit it, how it gets happen, how the expense line gets happen, how it gets processed, right? I want to jump on to the next one, rate card, right? So the interesting thing about rate card is if you're using cost, so you think about ultimately, I want to take actual effort and come up with a value. You do your plan cost up front. So I plan to do a bunch of work. I create a resource plan. It creates a cost plan. From there, it's going to go out and find a rate based on how you are asking for work to be done. So if I put in as an example, I need 100 hours out of the analyst group. I don't know who's going to do the work yet. It might say, okay, so let's see, analyst, it's going to say 245, right? If I look at an individual person, it could pick out a person. So it starts to refine it. So at the beginning, I'm kind of the macro rate. What's my rate? I'm looking at a group. Here's a group rate. Now that I start to allocate, confirm and or allocate, it's going to look at a more refined rate. You can also do this based on role. There's a lot of ways. And rate, we can do an entire session on rate model here. But the point I want to point out here is that you have this kind of plan cost and then allocated cost, which could be slightly different because now you know who's actually doing the work and those rates might be slightly different. When you get to timesheet, the time card for the actual cost is going to be looking at the person's rate, right? The individual person's rate. So this is where usually someone in IT finance or PMO finance, or depending on how your financial organizations are set up, this is where they'll look at establishing these rates. Again, this is the rate model. This is New Madrid. You can update. There's an entire update process for this. So maybe finance wants to run this because they manage all rates. But it may be an individual rate. So say, for instance, I'm part of the analyst group and the default rate's 245 for that group. I get picked to do that work from planning perspective, right? I get assigned in the resource plan. Scott gets allocated. Maybe my allocated rate is, say, 200, right? But when I actually get processed, because finance said so, because I'm in a certain group, maybe there's like a blended rate, all this stuff. Maybe my actual rate, because I'm Scott Wallace, not what I've worked on, but my actual rate might be, 210 or 215 or whatever. This is all, you have to do an entire modeling of how you want to do rate. But eventually it gets to a point that it needs to come up with that rate to get actual cost. And there's the process it goes through to come up with that actual process. Does a bunch of checks and eventually you'll come up with a rate, right? There's the data, there's this is again more reference point of how the model works, right? So when you think about impacts to PPM, right? Kind of back to this concept of, okay, so what's this session about? So there's project and non-project time, right? So there's time against project tasks, then there's non-project time. So we're able to collect effectively all time, right? So when you look at the whole capacity concept up here, the nice thing about doing all time is I'm able to collect everything. So I want to see and manage all work. I should be able to collect all time. If you're only partly doing it or doing it with one group, that's where you start to narrow down. And that's when you think about expansion, this is where you want to think about, okay, I see it most common is just a PMO is the group to start. The PMO is the team that collects time, then they've been expanded, right? So when you think about time off and resourcing, if you're doing personal calendar updates, like I can go to my personal calendar and I can put in time off, right? Like my calendar, I can put in an entry and, I can put an entry in and say, I'm taking this week time off, right? It's this, what type of work is this? Usually task work is coming from the actual task itself as a part of your business process. I've assigned the tasks, all that activity, but I could be putting in, say, time off, and I could put in time off, and then I kind of tell it when that time off is. So I block my calendar, effectively. I block my calendar. I don't know if we did this last time or not. I forgot who we did this with, Ben, but you can do calendaring, right? So you can block times of work. Of course, that affects capacity, right? That's what you want. You don't want your availability to be taken out. So you can put in time, plan to take time off, and then you have the actual, right? Quite often people ask me, can you do integrations to other time systems? You can, although I definitely, one of these best practices and worst practices, in my opinion, one of the, let's say, more challenging practices is to integrate this and make it become part of an HR system. I don't recommend that. There's also a lot of implications when you do that in terms of total effort and your 40 hours a week versus, what you're actually recording time, because everyone knows there's probably more time being put in than 40. So I definitely don't recommend this becoming an HR system. So that's something you got to look at if you do any type of integration. Of course, you were collecting actual effort, right, which is important. There's an automated process in the back end. So depending on how you're bringing time in, if you're doing it with time cards or very, very large customers will usually automate this from a separate system. If they're bringing that in, you want to automate that process, including the expense line creation. So you set jobs, because remember, it automatically creates an expense line. You want to automate that job for processing, right, to get your actual cost. Another big impact that I think is really important from a process standpoint is, remember this full cycle, right? If you don't have this full cycle active, what's not going to happen is you're not going to get updates to ETC and EAC. Effectively, as I put time in and I record that time in a project, that work is going to be part of a consumption process. And it's going to say, okay, I have actuals, prior period, I have current period planned, and I have forward plan. As things begin to come in prior period, of course, you're going to lock down, those are actuals. Then you have your forward. So you're going to come up with, okay, what's my remaining work, to complete. So it's going to be current period, forward. Now, when I say current period, it doesn't take into account everything you're doing day by day. It's on a monthly cycle, monthly process. So it's going to say this period forward, what's my remaining work? That's going to calculate EAC. So prior period plus the current period forward, it calculates EAC. So when you get on a project, I don't know if I have a project that has EAC on it, but let's see, so I can pull one up. Let's see an active one here. Without doing time entry, I guess what I'm saying is, and getting time in there on the financials, you're not going to get, let's see, time. Yeah, here it is. So estimated complete, right? So here's the plan cost. Here's, because we're in flight, I think we're still in the planning state. So effectively there's some time in here, but if you wanted this value updated, right? This will get updated as soon as you put time in. It'll start to consume and it'll give you forward looking, basically your estimate complete, right? So without time going in there, oh, by the way, this is not just time, it's expense. Effectively, the ETC is calculated as an expense with expense lines, right? Expense lines basically generate that and update this. Okay, so that's kind of all I want to get to quickly in the PowerPoint. In this PowerPoint we'll share with you, there's a whole chunk of Delta Deck detail here that tells you how all this process works in time. Redirection freeze, a bunch of activities, a whole bunch of nice slides and technical slides about how all this works. This will be included in the deck. I don't want to go through this today. It's too much slide deck stuff. Okay. So with that, I guess let's just open it up for questions. We'll just kind of open up and begin that dialogue on Q&A and we'll go from there.
All right, everyone, don't be shy. Go ahead. Who has their first question for Scott and Glenn?
Hi, this is Glenn Bowman with Vidant Health. And
yes,
I have some folks. Hi, I have some folks here with me. A couple of questions. We'll just do one and then let others go. But our first one pertains to what we call split weeks. So we are interested in tracking time by month. And so there are some months or some weeks that cross months. So let's say, I think January, in fact, started on Wednesday. And so we have sort of devised a process whereby we have to have folks edit the time card so that ultimately two time cards are generated, one for December and one for January. And we kind of wanted to just see how others may be approaching that, or any considerations from ServiceNow about accurately logging time for a given month whenever a week crosses 2 months.
Oh, so hey, Glenn, this is Ben. So yes, I've actually seen a lot of other customers do this as well. So one of the approaches you can take is probably the most common one I've seen is writing a business rule that checks your time cards as you save them. So if you've got a situation where, like, say the last part of the month ends on like a Wednesday, and then the first of the month is on a Thursday, what you can do is have a business rule check to see if that's the case. If that is the case, usually what we have done is a separate time card is created for that same task or whatever you're logging time against for the next month. And that's usually, if for reporting purposes, it's typically the reason why we would want to see this. So you need a couple of different components. You've got, of course, your time and everything in each day. But what we've also seen is customers add a month field onto the time card as well. So that way you can do reporting on a monthly basis. So if I want to see all my time for whatever filter I have, but for January, I make sure that I'm looking at the January entries only. That's why we have to separate them into separate time cards. So that kind of thing is, you're not necessarily going to be able to see that through the timesheet portal here, but you would see it through the time card entries themselves. And of course, if you had any reporting, you could filter them that way as well. So just a configuration you need to make on that side of it to make sure.
This is Biden still. A quick clarification on that. Did you say you create a second time card or a second task, like incident or task for the following month?
Oh no, a separate time card, not a.
Okay.
Separate time card. And basically what it'll do is you just have it kind of checking the fields there, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Make sure you're only entering data into the appropriate to. And from the time card here on the timesheet portal, I believe that there is not anything preventing you, like there's no UI policies preventing you from entering into, it's like in this example here, Scott's got. What you would have to do is put it's a data policy, which is a configuration in ServiceNow, very similar to like a UI policy, to make sure that you wouldn't be able to enter data into that particular field for the next month. So that way you have them separated for reporting. Because as it stands here, we've got, if you can see in this example on the top here, this would be one time card, but it's actually spanning across multiple months. So it's like, how would you know? And the other way to do it is, like I was mentioning, have two time cards, one for Sunday through Friday, and then another one for Saturday in this instance.
And Ben, wasn't it New York, the change to the individual days and time? There was a change in New York or something, like how the data is being held at the lowest level.
Ah, right. That's right. So I forgot about that.
Yeah. I just forgot that. Yeah.
Actually, now that I think about that, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that. So was that New York?
I think it was New York.
Daily? Yeah, let's go to that table, Scott. Actually, yeah. This may actually solve this for you if it's simply for reporting purposes.
So what table is it?
It's called Time Card Daily.
Yeah. Let's see.
We may even be able to bring that onto the time card table. I think it might be there out of the box on the time card table.
No. Hang on. Time card daily, here it is. And show list.
Yeah.
Oh,
so not just in here right now, but that's probably because we haven't submitted anything. So when we submit entries into this table, so this actually tracks. It's a table. It's underneath the covers now, specifically designed to kind of attack this case with reporting. So what it does is it creates a physical entry in there. It looks like we got a slide on this too, I think.
Yeah, I think it is time card daily. So.
Right. Was it that one?
Let's see. Portal. Recall. I'll find it here. It's in here somewhere. I remember seeing it. I wonder if it was Madrid then. It's possible it was Madrid.
It was Madrid that this came out in, yeah.
But I mean, okay.
Yeah. But basically the idea being that you could report off of this table. Let's see if I've got.
You have any in any instance you have up that has it in it?
I may have some data in my instance. Let me take a look here.
So that function allows you to split the months between months. Yeah, basically, because it's recorded at a daily. It's not recorded at a time sheet level like the example we just had. The split at the very end, that Saturday was the next month. Since we're recording it at a daily, you're allowed to basically split. So that it's effectively, everything's held at the lowest possible level, right?
Yep. So I can just show my screen here real quick. So I've got a few entries in here, but this is basically what you've got. So now you've got a way of saying, okay, for this particular time card on this, and I'm tracking the actual day in here and then the amount of time worked here. So I could run a report off of this table. I believe I've also got the time card. Yeah, time card. Yeah, so this is actually a reference field here to the specific time cards, and I could dot walk off here as well. So I could create any kind of reporting I wanted off of this table. So if I wanted a February report, what I could do is I could go, let's see, time card. And I could say, I want to see for a given individual. I could search on the, say if I wanted to look at a specific task, for instance, like a project. So I could filter on a task here or a set of tasks, but realistically, I'd be looking at this date field. Oops. And I could do things like on or before, after. So I could actually, look at anything that I wanted, anything in my list here. So I could filter this on any date range I wanted to, and I could separate it out by month if I wanted to, or by quarter, or by whatever I want. And these are at the day level, as opposed to having a time card that's got a set amount of days in it that I can't separate out. Did I answer your question? And we'll make sure to include this slide in the slide deck we distribute, so you know where to find this table.
Yes, that helps out tremendously. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Was that in New York? This is Heather. Was that in New York or Madrid? Did we determine for the time card dailies?
Let's say that was.
I'm looking right now. I'm looking. Ben,
Okay.
you're sharing. I'm looking at the Delta deck right now. I'm going to go look at Madrid. I thought it was New York because there's all that changes in New York. But
Yes, this is a New York instance I'm in right now. So
Okay.
New York, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when it actually showed up, I'm going to go look at the Delta deck and find out. But I think it was.
Yeah, it is New York. I'm in a New York instance right now, Scott.
Okay.
It's my personal instance, not yours. So, yeah, it is New York. We come out with features so quickly, I sometimes even forget they're even there.
Other questions? Anyone else?
So, Charles, this is Mark. I think this kind of for Vidant, and I appreciate you bringing this group together. I think that kind of illustrates some of how, as end users, how would we know that that new table was there and could be used for that purpose?
So that would be available in our docs pages. So our ServiceNow documentation for in that case would have been the New York release.
Okay.
Yep, there's actually a page specifically for that called the release notes, if you're not familiar. Every release, we release all the new features and the updates to whatever environment that is, so New York, Orlando, whatever. I would go in there and check those out for the PPM side of things.
Thank you.
It is here, Ben. I thought it was in the data model. It's mentioned here, time card daily.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, this is all, like I said, this is all.
Yeah, this is in the deck that you have now. But we'll share out with you, but it's in there.
Great. Any other questions from the field out there?
Charles, I have another one, but I don't want to hog all the time here, so
I'll go
this is
for
Glenn.
it.
Okay, Glenn at VitaHealth again. So just thinking about entering time on the time cards, and also noting that the actual time card field is updated on the resource plan. One of the challenges that we have had is where we have scenarios where the resource plan may not in all cases exist. And so let's say someone is entering time and or doing some project work and they have a question for a colleague. They may pull their colleague in to work with them an hour or two during that week. And at the end of the week, that colleague wants to know, hey, where should I log my time? So the project member gives them the task number, and so they log their time. And there was not a resource plan created for that colleague. And so because of that, we found we can't, in all cases, find the actual time card values on the resource plan as being always correct. So we're just curious about a best practice or how others may handle that. Is there a requirement that a resource plan exist in order to enter time? Or do you just kind of account for that possibility and note that those numbers may not be exact?
Yeah, so this actually kind of comes down to a process question, really. So in ServiceNow, you could do a couple of things. One, if you wanted to make sure there was always a resource plan, irregardless of who's booking time to a project or whatever, you could create a workflow behind the scenes that if someone doesn't have a resource plan on that project that they're booking time to, or the project that the project task is, or whatever it is, you could create a workflow behind the scenes to automatically create a resource plan for them. Now, it's also a process thing. So if you're automatically creating a resource plan, you got to notify the project manager and make sure that the plan looks correct. And especially if it's maybe somebody just accidentally booked time to the wrong project or something like that. So you do maybe want to have a workflow process behind that. Or maybe it's just simply notifying the project manager before they approve that time, to make sure that there is a resource plan on the project. You could also enforce rules like making sure that the resource plan field is not empty when somebody's booking time to a project record. And if it is, notify the resource or the project manager to be able to create one, or tell them they're booking time to the wrong project or something like that. Those are all, certainly things we can do through our workflow engine.
Yep. So I want to add something else into that, Ben. This is something you and I, ran into like with our Miami customer, and I believe, and I'll confirm this, but this is a common scenario. Basically, what happens, a good example of scenario that we ran into that's pretty common. So I'm going to use myself as an example, and I'm going to do some work in February for a project, and it's only going to take 10 hours. And today in New York, they go create a resource plan for Scott. They put it in, they say 10 hours. It's going to move that time. It's going to forward load that time. So it's going to say, okay, the first couple of days, book all this time for Scott up front. It'll create those allocation records for me in the front, basically the beginning of the month, beginning of February. But the project manager doesn't really know when Scott's going to do the work. And Scott finally gets around to it, and Scott does the work on February, 25th. Well, there's no allocation record for Scott on the 25th. Therefore, it becomes an orphaned record. In Orlando, there's some changes to the allocation routines and how it does its spread. And there's also been some addition to make sure that when we're missing allocation records, that they get created. So part of this is what you described here is a common scenario where you've got kind of this orphaned. Now this is assuming the person's assigned to the project and they're doing work in the project. It's missing that one allocation record just because of basically the spread. I think what Ben was going after is a different business process that someone just finds time, because you can do that on a time sheet portal. You can just go pick a project and put time on it. You can prevent that with some settings, but you just pick something and then suddenly that becomes an orphaned record. There's no record of that person even ever being on the project. So you kind of got two scenarios. One of the scenarios, like I mentioned, which was internal for us, was kind of how the spread happens and how we associate that with allocation records and making sure that there is an allocation record so we don't get an orphan time card. Basically doesn't know what to do, because then what happens is that resource plan doesn't get updated, therefore the cost plan doesn't get updated. So you've got to kind of this actual with no resource plan information being updated. So we're fixing that in Orlando. I think the scenario where someone's actually not on the project, that's more of a business process PM. One scenario is, well, how does that time get approved, right? If that time goes in, does it get routed to the project manager? How does it get routed? That's another way to look at how you account for that time to make sure it's like a business process. So this is just general comments quickly on that topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can attack that problem too, depending on the scenario that you're running into, whether it's just simply like a project manager not putting the right resource plan or something on the project, or it's just you're not, I don't know, it could be could be just people booking time to the wrong projects too. And the problem with doing that is, like you said, Scott, when we were out there, that we had a lot of situations where the time card, we had a lot of orphaned records, like you were saying. So that can really mess up your reporting as well, like for capacity planning and that kind of stuff. So just got to make sure we don't have orphan time card records out there without any resource plans or cost plans tied to them.
This is Stacy Romano from Cone Health. Just to add on to that, we do actually, I don't think I'm in Orlando yet, but I send my resource managers out. These are the actual hours by project, and these are your resource plans. And if they've made a mistake and somebody actually added some hours to a project that they should have put a resource plan in because they're busy also, it doesn't go back, right? It doesn't retroactively fix the fact they forgot that they told Sue to work 10 hours on this project last week and they didn't put the resource plan in. It just kind of, like you said, orphans. Yeah,
so now it could, what I'm saying. Our workflow engine and our flow designer can do that for you. So you could say, if someone submits a time card with no resource plan in the resource plan field on the time card, make one for them. It could do that. But like I said, there's a process thing behind that as well. Is like, okay, let the project manager know if there's no resource plan there, just to make sure that everything lines up as far as the hours go.
What I'm sharing here is the Orlando Delta deck, because Orlando, I can share this under Safe Harbor for everyone's on the phone, just so you know. But Orlando is in early access last Friday, and there's a deck. These are called Delta decks, and we can share these out to the group here for Madrid, New York, and I just completed Orlando. As you can see, these are like 200 set of slides, right? This goes through every single feature in the ITBM release. So if you're going from New York to Orlando, these are all the things you should be aware of. Basically, think about the online docs tell you a lot of this, but this is even more detail. Sometimes things are covered in here that are just give you more specifics. Like we just talked about this even load, right? Resource management, smart even load. This addresses that problem of not having a proper allocation record for when I put in the time for the month of February, because it front loaded it. So it does a better process of loading. So there is an allocation record there, so we don't get that orphan time card. What you were just discussing there is, okay, yeah, we forgot about time. Ben, you're right. There's a flow designer can go find these scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Those specific. Yeah. We're trying to make in Orlando, there were a lot of enhancements. Besides improvements, there's a whole section of improvements, but one of these is we did some significant improvements in resource management. One, the ability to extend, two, smart load, and then negative availability, right? And I can share these decks out with you, which gives you, all the detail for the full entire release for everything.
Yeah. So Scott's talking about, so we have two kind of scenarios. You have one where you've got a resource plan already, but someone's just simply not allocated to it, or two where there's just no resource plan at all.
And that does happen in the hospital setting because a lot of the teams are very collaborative together, and they just might work a couple hours on that one piece, and the resource manager that's not the main one for the bigger part of the project might totally miss it. That's why I send those reports out to them.
Yeah, might be a good opportunity to certainly Orlando will help you solve some of those issues when it comes to having a resource plan, but like missing an allocation, for instance. Also, if there is no resource plan at all, then that can also be automated as well. So I think you can possibly solve your report thing with maybe some automation. Certainly capable. ServiceNow is certainly capable of doing that.
Yeah, if there was a best practice sheet on how we should be doing it or recommendations, but it sounds like there's a lot of options. So it's hard.
Yeah, in this case, it's more process driven than it is technology driven.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions from the field?
This is Glenn invited. I have one more.
Go for it, Glenn.
If it's okay. All right, thank you. You all had reminded us a few weeks ago about the resource aggregate monthly table, and we have found that useful to easily report on allocated versus actual.
Yep.
And then kind of taking that to the next level here recently, we note that table allows you to tie to a project, so you can see, kind of look for a given project, what the allocated and actuals are, but it does not, the best we can tell, let you tie it to a task so that you could see, for a KTLO task, for example, of what the allocated and actuals are. So wanted to pick your brain, and are we missing something, or is that an intended limitation?
Yeah, so to report on so you're talking about you'd made a operational resource plan in that case, right? For, maybe 0.1 FTE or whatever for a group.
Yeah.
What that shows in the allocation tables, if you've allocated that plan, you're going to see I believe there's a reference field on there to the resource plan itself. So one of the ways that you could maybe identify that is you could dot walk into it. So into that resource plan field on there, I believe there's a resource plan field on there, right? I think there is. You could dot walk into that and look at the operational, I believe there's a field called operational work type. And you could bring that field in as a dimension into your reporting. So you would know, you could look at the allocated. So on that table, it would show allocated, but there's not going to be a task there, but there should be a resource plan that it's associated with. And that way you could bring in that operational work type field to possibly use that as a dimension for you to report off of. Let me see if I can find an example.
So Glenn, I want to comment on that too. So Ben, if you want to share. So Glenn, what you just brought up is an interesting scenario that a lot of customers are trying to understand and struggling with from a process point. So from the operational side. So a lot of customers are using operational resource plans, and they're striping to consume availability and, whatever groups they're using, right? But the level of detail and the tracking and all that at that type of a process using operational plans, like Ben mentioned, it's got some limitations to it, because it's not like the other resource side, like you're actually tracking against a task and all that, right? So some customers, and these are the customers that are more mature because it's more of a complex process. They are using, instead of using operational resource plans, they're using operational resource projects and creating resource plans against that. Effectively, the project becomes a container for all work, whether it's strategic work or operational work. And there's a couple of customers I know that they're managing all of their operational work in operational projects. And the primary reason, besides just the difference in the level of reporting and so on, one of the reasons they're doing that is because if you look at cost and all that, that's all managed in the container of project, with cost plans and everything else like that, rates, all that kind of stuff, right? So they want to see everything in a single portfolio. So I get a portfolio for the business. I want to see all of my planned work, all of my pipeline work, all of my actual work. They want to see it in one set, the way to group it together in a portfolio, or even a program, I suppose. But that was their goal, was to see all of it. And there was a little bit of a limitation if you use just operational projects and bringing all that together in a single portfolio. So they established operational projects, and they build those projects for the full year. And they create resource plans that effectively do the same thing. They do the allocation, they spread it, they have all those costs come in, they manage them this way. Actually, one customer had hundreds of operational projects because they wanted that level of granularity. The thing is, and they're able to distinguish between a standard project and an operating project, right? So they had to do a little configuration to kind of make sure they were looking at only certain types in certain ways. But what it gave them is that holistic view at the top of the portfolio of all work. Again, it's more mature. It's some work to build it. You got to kind of do some configuration to kind of be able to do that. But that's an example of where if you find that the operational plan isn't sufficient enough, or the way you want to operate, it doesn't give you the level of granularity and control, another method is to go to the operating side, or operational projects.
We have an operational project, and then within that operational project, we typically have 3 tasks: one for KLO, one for request,
Yep.
and one for incidents. And then we have resource plans on those tasks.
Yeah, so you're doing that already effectively. You're instead of using operational
Right.
resource plans, you're using it at the project level. The project becomes the container for all the activity, and most importantly, including kind of the plan cost and actual cost, right?
In that context is where ideally that aggregate table, whereas now it has a reference to a project, if it had a reference to the task, then we could drill it down into for a given incident or KTLO or request.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think, and I wasn't sure because I thought I heard the word allocation table versus aggregate, but is the thought, Ben, that aggregate table has a tie to the resource plan?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking the
Allocation.
the cost plan breakdown table is what I was thinking, not the aggregate.
Okay.
So you could report off of the cost plan breakdown table, and at that point you would get all the entries, right? But that would be more of an involved report, because you're tying back then, looking at, like, say, operational work type on the resource plan itself, like I was mentioning, and building a report off of that.
Okay.
From the breakdown entries. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Any other last minute questions or comments related to the office hour that you guys may have for Ben or Scott?
Hey guys, this is Vidant again. I want to circle back to the time card dailies table. I'm looking at it in one of our sub-prod environments, and we're in New York. So I kind of noticed that it's not a retroactive table, right? So records aren't going to be created on this table for like our past time cards, right? It's just like the new ones that we create after we upgrade to New York going forward.
Right. Yep. Now, if you wanted to populate that, you could probably do that with a script. What I'd probably suggest doing is like writing a fixed script that essentially kind of triggers that business rule that's on the time card table that populates that table. So there would be a way for you to generate that data. It would probably be in the form of a fixed script of sorts.
All right, thank you. That's exactly what I was wondering.
Okay. Final questions. 4 minutes left.
I just wanted to introduce Namita Namitas, if I pronounced your name properly, Namitas, sorry. She joined the call here. I know it's probably pretty late over there, but I wanted to just introduce you to the group.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. And hey, everyone. This is so dynamic group. I was just quiet because this is my first day on this call, but I'm excited to be part of this. I am from the PPM product management. So hello, everyone. Thank you, Scott.
Mm-hmm, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita, for joining. Definitely some of these individuals you've talked at length with as well. So it's great to have another SME as a part of these. Well, everyone, it's been about 3 minutes left. I'm assuming at this time there are no more further questions. I just want to thank you guys all for attending this office hour number 2. We have another one coming up in February, actually 2 more. So definitely attend as much as you can. And I will be sending out the recording of this session after after I receive it. And then Scott will also send over the PowerPoint decks that he showed. And then I will also be sending you guys a survey so that way you guys can comment on how well you thought this office hour went. So thank you all so much. Without further ado, give you back 3 minutes back to your day. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend. Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Ben.